identities are the reason why everyone is so miserable. Now, hear me out. That is not me saying that individuality is the reason why we are all miserable. We are all, of course, unique individuals. A very complex amalgamation of genetics, experiences, personality, a limitless variety of things. That is good. That is what makes life interesting. If we were all clones of each other, this would be a pretty boring place. But identities are something else altogether. Identities are a modern concoction. We are told that we need to craft our own identities, revolve around our own identities, discover our own identities, market our own identities. It's depicted as though this is our choice, and yet the other message that we also get is that our identities are predetermined. Someone else decides what our identity is and orders us to comply with said identity based off of the fact that they have categorized identities in certain ways, based off of sex, based off of race, based off of political views, so on and so forth. And they will decide, based off of where all of these charts intersect, where you belong, and you are supposed to comply with that. This modern concept of identities is an enormous part of why people are so miserable. This is not something that previous generations dealt with in this way. They did not view themselves or other people this way. Prior generations of human beings did not sit around asking themselves what their identity was, much less, after deciding on their identity, demanding that other people stop whatever they are doing to dance around in circles as though their identity is a maypole and validate the identity that you have now suddenly decided is who you are. People were not obsessed with an identity, they were obsessed with their role. What is the difference? There's actually a huge difference. A farmer was not a farmer because deep down in his soul, in the core of his being, who he was as a human being was someone who put seeds into the ground and caused things to grow and flourish. No, he was a farmer not because that's who he was as a person. He was a farmer because that is what he did. And he did it in order to survive, so that he would not starve. A farmer was not an identity. It was a role. It was a job. And people used to be a lot less focused on who am I, and a lot more focused on what am I doing and what do I need to do. Now, that's not to say that the question, who am I, is a bad question. It's actually a good question. It's one that is worth asking, but it is not one that should be at the center of your life, eclipsing everything else. Who am I is a question that should exist alongside many other questions, such as, why am I here? What is the purpose of my life? What is my role? What should I be doing right now? How can I contribute, making my life better and making other people's lives better? There are many important questions, but modern mankind has decided that the who am I question is the only one. They have turned it into an idol and put it at the center of our culture and demanded that all bow before it in worship, prostrate themselves before the great identity. And what is the result? The result is that most people are very unhappy. Now, this is not surprising. Science tells us that the more that you focus on yourself, the more depressed you will be. Science itself backs this up. Psychology backs this up. In fact, psychology notes that there is actually no difference between the feeling of self-consciousness, being uncomfortably focused on yourself, and the feeling of misery. If you want to have that proven, think about a moment in your life in which you were the most self-conscious. You were maybe on a stage or in front of your class as a kid having to give a speech, and all eyes were on you. Remember that feeling. Just re-experience it. All the focus on me, and you want to kind of crawl inside away from that. Now think about the last time you were truly miserable. Do those feelings actually feel any different? We have centered our entire society, our entire culture, our entire view of life around focusing on ourselves. The one thing that science tells us is guaranteed more than any other to make you miserable. And then we pretend like there's some mystery in the fact that depression is at record highs. Anxiety is at record highs. Mental health issues across the board are at record highs. Violence is beginning to spike. Dissatisfaction is way up, despite having more material comforts and provisions than virtually anyone else in the entire history of the planet has ever had. Meaning has collapsed. Relationships have collapsed. Politics has grown more polarized. Everything is falling apart. And on an individual level, this just means that the person themselves is falling apart under burdens that they cannot shoulder, that they are miserable under. And it's not surprising, because we are doing the very thing that we know is most likely to cause that. We are focused on identity. Not that you should be oblivious and shallow and never ask the deep questions. As I said, there are many deep questions that we should ask that bring meaning to our life. But when you take identity, who am I? Me, I must craft me. I must make me into a product. I must sell me. I must evaluate me based on others and their approval of me. If they don't approve of me or stop their whole life to express that approval of me, then I must resent them because they are not validating me. me, 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 me. And everyone is mentally ill. Everyone is resentful, everyone is entitled, everyone is depressed, everyone is isolated, everyone feels unvalued, disconnected, disillusioned, hopeless. It's time to start connecting the dots about what we're doing and be a little bit more intentional about this. And from our culture's unhealthy obsession, the part where you take identity, which is one facet out of hundreds of others, and put it in the center and make it God. Out of that, we get identity politics. Identity being at the center of a person's life may be a new phenomenon, but identity politics is not. When identities become your whole framework for understanding yourself, obviously they become the framework for how you understand other people. And once everything in life starts to be viewed through the lens of identity, of course you wind up with identity politics, among many other things. But the fact that identity politics, at least, is nothing new, is actually encouraging. If you're someone who believes that it is those who do not know history that are doomed to repeat it, then the implication is that those who are willing to stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, instead of insisting on reinventing the wheel that has already been invented, then the fact that this is not new should actually be comforting to you, because it means we do have a certain amount of guidance. So I'm going to talk today about some verses from Proverbs, of all places, that speak directly to some of these identity politic issues. Now, there's going to be two different groups of people that are listening right now. And no matter which of those groups you fall into, it's still worth hearing what these verses have to say. Because if you're a Christian or a Jew, then you claim to believe that these verses are inspired by God, that they are divine and accurate. At least if you're a practicing Christian or a practicing Jew. Obviously, there is a big difference between a virtue-signaling religious person who repeats the words and does whatever they want, and someone who is practicing that religion, as in they have committed to this way of life and they defer to those teachings and they course correct in order to align with those teachings. That's what a practicing Christian or a practicing Jew does. If you're not willing to do that, then you haven't actually committed to that religion. You just tacked that on as a side note to your life because it's one more identity facet, not because it's anything meaningful or solid. And that's fine. I'm not telling you what you can do, but there are differences between the two groups, and I'm not going to pretend like there's not in order to keep from offending anybody. There is a difference between someone who's actually in the military and someone who is 10 years old playing war with his friends in the backyard. Doesn't mean that the little boy is a bad person, but it does mean that is not the real thing. Now, if you're not a Christian or a Jew, I would assume that you're somebody who still believes that if human beings for thousands of years thought that this wisdom was so profound that they spent their life copying it by hand before the printing press in order to make sure that future generations, you, had access to it, then even if you disagree with it because you're not committed to these teachings, it's still worth at least hearing and evaluating. I mean, if you wanted to hear what a Stoic would say on something, you'd go read Marcus Aurelius. If you wanted to understand the perspective of philosophy at a set point in time, you'd go read Nietzsche. You know? This should not be any different for you. This is wisdom that humanity thought was worth preserving for 3,000 years. If you're not committed to it in a religious way, well, then that means you're not committed to it. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't have value just from a historical perspective, or it doesn't mean that it shouldn't be listened to and evaluated in the same way that you would read anyone else, the way that you would read Sir Isaac Newton, or the way that you would read Einstein, or pick whatever subject you want and then choose an expert in that field from the past, from kind of its foundational point. Of course, you go back to that. So, regardless of whether you're a curious individual who just wants to know what did they actually think 3,000 years ago about identity politics, and is there anything I can learn from it? Or whether you are a practicing Christian or Jew who believes that there's an additional layer on top of that, of this being divinely inspired wisdom that you have committed to living by. For people in both groups, there's something valuable to at least looking at these verses. Really, the only people for whom there is no value would be the air quote Christians or Jews who are not practicing, who are not committed in any kind of way, or at least in any kind of serious way. When the rubber meets the road, they're not committed to it. This is just a costume to put on in a very shallow way as a one tiny piece of their identity. It's the earrings in their outfit and nothing more. If they're not interested in going any deeper than that, then that's probably the only group for which this is not going to have any value. But for everyone else, let's look at these verses. Solomon wrote the Proverbs. He is historically considered to have had the reputation of being the wisest man to ever live. And in Proverbs 20, verse 10, he wrote, differing weights and differing measures, both of them are abominable to the Lord. Okay, what does that actually mean when you start looking at the Hebrew? Merchants used to have scales, and they would have a weight that would go on one side that you had to trust them was accurate. And the product would go on the other side, and the scales would balance out, and that's how you conducted business. If the merchant was crooked, they could claim that the weight was of a certain amount when it was actually rigged in their favor. So what this is actually saying is using one standard to weigh this situation and using a different standard to weigh that situation. Or, the second part, differing measures. This is an ephah, so this was a container that would be used for measuring, say, grain. You would fill the container with the grain. So, using unequal containers for measuring the capacity of something, because that's what a container is measuring, is the capacity. Claiming that it holds X amount when it doesn't. Doing either of those things. Having double standards of any kind for any reasons, even well-intentioned ones, is an abomination, meaning revolting, repulsive, disgusting, triggering of the gag reflex to Yahweh, the existing of all existence, the essence on which everything else exists. You are destroying the foundation here. And that is true whether you're using double standards to evaluate two different people, using this standard for that person because he's poor and this standard for that person because he's rich, or whether you're doing that when it comes to others and yourself. There's an example that gets used quite a bit online, that we tend to cut ourselves breaks that we don't cut other people. For example, if you're in traffic and you cut someone else off, that's not because you're a bad person, that's because of your circumstances. You're late for work. If you're in traffic and someone else cuts you off, that's not because of their circumstances, that's because they're a bad person. They're an a-hole. That's the way we evaluate things. We give ourselves a certain amount of understanding that we don't give to others. So, this is a verse explicitly forbidding that. Having double standards, whether between two people, that you're acting as mediator or evaluator of their dispute, or whether it's when it comes to the standards you hold yourself to versus the standards you hold other people to. Now in this same chapter, in verse 23, it gives a very similar warning. Differing weights are an abomination to the Lord, and a false scale is not good. Okay, well, what's the difference between what was said the first time and what was said here? There actually is a significant difference. The first part is basically the same. Double standards, using one standard to weigh this, and a different standard to weigh that, is revolting to Yahweh, the existing of all existence. Okay, the second part of that verse. And claiming a balance that is actually deceitfully weighted in one direction through treachery or guile. Talking about a scale that's been rigged. It's weighted to lean one way while you're claiming to everyone else, no, it's balanced. This would be, say, a journalist claiming they are giving you the unbiased story. It's perfectly level. I'm not favoring either side, when they actually are. They've weighted things a little bit on this side of their personal politics, at a little bit at a minimum. Claiming that you are being balanced when you're actually putting your thumb on the scales is not good. Here it's very important to understand what the biblical word good means. We tend to think of good as being either moral or immoral. And there are words in the Bible that are about morality, righteousness being one of them, but the word good is not really a word that is talking about whether something is moral or not. It is talking about whether something is beneficial, functional, and life-giving. For example, a good tree is not a moral tree. A good tree is one that is healthy, that is growing, that's either going to give you timber or it's producing fruit. A good cup is not a moral cup. It's a cup that doesn't leak. It does what it is supposed to do. It is useful. It holds the water. It is functional. It is beneficial. You can drink better with a cup than you can trying to scoop a tiny bit of water with your hand and lap it up like a dog. It's beneficial. It's life-giving. So what it's saying here is that pretending to have a balance, whether you're pretending to others or pretending to yourself, that you're just so unbiased, that is not healthy. It is not functional. It is not beneficial. And it is not going to be life-giving to your existence. Now in Proverbs 24, we really start getting into some direct identity politics. Okay? So in verse 23, it says, "These also are the sayings of the wise. To show partiality in judgment is not good. He who says to the wicked, 'You are righteous,' people will curse him, and nations will abhor him." Okay, what does it mean to have partiality? I mean, it says that is not good. It is not beneficial. It is not functional. Does not work. And it is not life-giving. But what does it mean to show partiality? Does it just mean to play favorites? That's what the English word would indicate. You're going to love this. The Hebrew words in the original text are literally not to have partiality, but to recognize faces. That is the literal translation. Okay, well, what does that mean, to recognize faces? Does it mean you're supposed to pretend you don't know that person? No, because the Bible is never for dishonesty. It's not saying, yeah, I know that's John, but I'm going to pretend I don't know that's John. Of course not. What good does that do? Your face is your identity. That is how someone tells you apart from another person. They recognize your face and they go, that's John. It's not Bob, it's John. So when it says to recognize faces in judgment is not good, what it is literally saying is to recognize identities in judgment is not good. Okay, the word there for not actually the word not. It's the word for never. To recognize identities in judgment is never good. It's never beneficial. It's never functional. It is never life-giving. It is never conducive to flourishing. Okay, what does judgment mean? The word for judgment here is a word indicating standards of measurement or weighing out the verdicts of justice. So to recognize identities when you are weighing out the verdicts of justice or setting the standards of measurement, that is never a good thing. It is never beneficial, functional, meaning productive, or life-giving, conducive to things flourishing and growing. To play favorites based off of identities, one way or another, regardless of which identity is being favored, it does not make exceptions. That is never good. It will never lead to good. The next verse, the one that we read that says, "He who says to the wicked, you are righteous, people will curse him, nations will abhor him," that's not a change in subject. That's a continuation. Why is it never good to play identity politics? Because if the identity is the sinner, that's what you will wind up doing. Eventually, the criminal will have the better identity over the victim, and since that's what counts, you will be siding with the identity instead of siding with the individual based on the crime. The word for wicked here is the word for criminal, someone who is guilty, unjust, and in the wrong. Whoever tells that kind of person, the criminal who's in the wrong, who has wronged someone else, who is guilty, whoever tells that person, you are honorable, you're responsible, and you live with integrity. That's what the word righteous means. Whoever declares the guilty to be right and just in what they've done, and therefore innocent of their crimes, well, it's okay that you shot someone because you grew up poor. You're actually the victim. What happens when that becomes okay to do as a result of recognizing identities? The people, this is the word for families or communities, will publicly curse him. This is a very interesting word for cursing. It means to bore holes into him. And outside nations, not your nation, these are the other organized nations of the world, and it would also include their collective institutions, will revile and reject the person who does that. They will denounce him with an indignant, seething rage. There is built-in justice into human beings. They know that this stuff is wrong. And even when they condone it for political reasons, because they've decided that they're not going to look at the results, they've decided that they're not going to look at the individuals and the fact that this is wronging someone in order to score political points for a cause, that you're putting the cause above the people, there's a part of them that's always going to be dissatisfied with even getting their way, because the justice is built into people. And we see this. We see a backlash to all of this. We see a resentment to this sort of stuff becoming so prevalent among a very small minority of people in positions of power, because most people are not for this. And that's not just most white people or most straight people or pick your bad guys. No, there are a lot of Hispanic people. There are a lot of black people. There are a lot of women. There are a lot of gay people who are not for this. They are tired of being labeled by an identity and having things predetermined based on identities rather than based on who is actually in the right or the wrong in this case. You know, the Carmelo Anthony case would be a great example of that just happened. He stabbed a 17-year-old boy in the heart over being asked to stay out of the opposite team's tent. And yet there are some people, not most by any means, just a loud small fringe, who want to scream that because Carmelo Anthony, the stabber, was black and his victim was white, that somehow he was allowed to do it and his identity makes him the victim, regardless of the fact that his actions make him the aggressor. And to them, the fact that he has to pay the same penalty as if the roles were reversed and Austin Metcalf had stabbed him and would be expected to pay the penalty, the fact that his identity is not going to be factored into it is an outrage to them. But they are the small minority. And there were many black people who agreed with that, including several of the witnesses who were on the teams, were black players, who said Carmelo Anthony was the aggressor. He was the one picking a fight with everybody. He was the one being aggressive. He was the one who pulled a knife when there was nothing going on that came anywhere near a level that any reasonable person would have thought that they were in harm's way. It was him. And they all also had nothing but nice things to say about the victim, and yet that did not change the narrative for some people, because they are completely bought into the identity politics thing. But there are very specific groups that are bought into this, and everyone else understands that no, you actually don't judge people based on the color of their skin. You base it on the content of their character, or in criminal cases, on their actions. Because I don't really care if you're a good person most of the time. If you stab someone, well, okay, you stabbed someone. There is a penalty for stabbing someone unless it is truly in self-defense. And nobody out there is special. We are all created equal. The following verse, after talking about the people are going to abhor those who do this, who behave this way, they're going to be revolted by those people. They're going to bore holes into them. It says, but to those who rebuke the wicked will be delight, and a good blessing will come upon them. He kisses the lips who gives a right answer. Okay, well, what does that mean? Towards the people who convict him, the criminal, because that's who we're talking about in this context. Him could also apply to the warped judge who used identity politics to let him off. Whoever convicts those people in the wrong, because both of those people are in the wrong. And the word for convict there is a word that has to do with proof. So it's talking about somebody building a case based off of evidence, a clear case that proves beyond a reasonable doubt, that reveals the truth and corrects the situation. Whoever does that, for them, there will be goodwill. This is a word that describes a pleasantness of sensory enjoyment. For hearing, it would be harmony. For eyes, it would be beauty. For taste, it would be sweetness. For touch, it would be softness. This is a sensory enjoyment. We viscerally respond positively to this, to clear cases, evidence, proof, the truth being revealed, and the people who uphold that. And we are viscerally revolted by those who refuse to do that. And those people give good blessings. So once again, good is beneficial, productive, functional, life-giving, something that flourishes, causes growth. This word for blessing is baruch, so it's a word that indicates kneeling, to honor, or if it's coming from above, as in the person that is being honored, it would be them stooping down to show favor. So it's the picture of, say, a beggar kneeling before a king to honor the king, and the king stooping to bestow generosity on that beggar. It's a mutual thing. All of that descends on the person who upholds the standards of justice and brings an end to this sort of identity politics. What about the part of kissing the lips of him who gives a right answer? This is talking about a concrete answer. It's the word debar, which is the word for word as well as the word for the thing that that word is describing. So it's a word that has a tangible, material reality to it. So it would kind of be like saying a concrete answer. What does the right part mean? He who gives a right answer. That is a straightforward, direct, morally right, concrete answer. Others could just kiss them. When you've been subjected to identity politics and the perversion of justice, to criminals in the wrong being told that they're actually the good guys, and somebody steps up and says, no, right is right and wrong is wrong, and I don't care about your identity. You do just want to kiss them. Restoring properly aligned integrity through the solid truth, even when it's tough, because people have gotten to where they're not used to it. Deep down, we all know that that's a sign of respect and affection, of devotion and trust. The word here indicates both a caress and an equipping. People can tell you what you want to hear. They can tell you, oh, sweetie, honey, you're right. Other people are just keeping you down and you're the victim. Maybe that's true. But let's assume for the sake of this example, it's not. You know it's not. You want to hear it. But even when you do, you know it's condescending. And condescending is something that is incredibly disrespectful. When a politician tells a black person that they can't be anything other than a drug-dealing gangbanger on the streets of a major city in an urban center, that's imposed on them from the outside and there's nothing they can do about it. That is incredibly condescending. And people deep down, even if they don't stop to evaluate it as such on a conscious level, on a subconscious level, they know that it's condescending. That's why it doesn't bring the satisfaction that it's supposed to bring, even though that's what you want to hear. Likewise, when someone tells us the truth, which is, okay, if you're living in an impoverished urban center, surrounded by bad influences, other people that are gangbanging or drug dealing, etc., and you maybe don't have access to mentors, you are at a disadvantage, and we're not going to pretend otherwise. We're not going to pretend like those disadvantages don't exist. And also, there have been many people who, despite incredible disadvantages, have made something of their life, and you can too. That is the truth. And even though it may not be what you actually want to hear, on a subconscious level, we all recognize that there is respect to that message. It is elevating you to the position of adult, who is actually seen as an equal, who's actually seen as capable, who's actually seen as having potential, one that we're rooting for, as opposed to treating like a helpless baby that we need to talk down to and pat on the head like a little dog or something. Human beings can't help but react internally to these things in certain ways. And part of the reason for the misery is the identity politics, because you may not stop to evaluate that the message that you're taking in is condescending, that it's disrespectful, disincentivizing, demoralizing, infantilizing, but your subconscious recognizes it, and it internalizes that. And of course you're going to be miserable from that. The truth may not be what we want to hear, and yet our subconscious reacts to the truth in healthier ways. And we actually feel better from the truth. In Proverbs 18, verse 5, there's kind of a similar warning. To show partiality to the wicked is not good, nor to thrust aside the righteous in judgment. Okay, well, what does this verse mean? What does it add to the mix? The word for showing partiality here is a little bit different emphasis. This is talking about respectfully elevating. It's talking about bestowing a dignity on someone. Okay, so we're talking about, and once again, the wicked would be the criminal. The criminal who is guilty, who is in the wrong, who has been unjust to others. To treat them with respect and elevate them up onto a pedestal. To bestow a dignity on that behavior that is completely unfitting and unearned. And to favor that behavior. Making shows of acceptance towards that behavior. Idolizing them, probably because of identity, is not good. It is not fitting. It is not beneficial. It is not functional. It is not life-giving. It's not going to cause life to flourish and thrive. This is talking about a warped redirecting of the center of society, the respect in society. Instead of giving the center and the respect to the people that are worthy of it. You do it based off of identity, even if that means that the criminal is now being elevated as the center. The problem with that is that warped redirecting towards the harmful and away from the righteous being those who take responsibility for embodying and conforming to the ultimate standard of just integrity. Those who are leading their lives with honor, to redirect everything away from them and towards the criminal in the wrong, deprives the righteous people, those living with honor, of justice. And it subverts the entire societal system of standards and verdicts. And the indication in the original here is that that's going to cause widespread decline for society. You actually need the standards and the verdicts of justice to have integrity, to be right. Because if they're not, the whole society becomes corrupt, decays, and crumbles. And it takes everyone out when that happens, from the criminals to the righteous. You actually do have to orient your society towards the things you want. If you want more crime, glorify the criminal. If you want more victims, glorify victimhood. If you want more mental illness, glorify mental illness. If you want phoniness, incentivize shows over substance. Posting a hashtag over doing something in your community. People get more praise for posting a hashtag than they do for going down to their soup kitchen where nobody sees them and actually doing something real for someone. So if you want more phoniness, that's a great way to do it. But the reverse is also true. If you want more reality and less showboating, incentivize the reality. And stop giving any attention to the flashy showboaters. If you want more entrepreneurs, idolize the entrepreneurs. Set them up as the heroes in society. If you want more educated people, set the educated people up in society as the goal that everyone is aiming towards. If you want moral people who live in a way that builds communities, that makes their neighborhoods and their cities better, that's what you have to incentivize. When you flatten everything out into this identity stuff and say that everyone within this special identity is safe, regardless of behavior, and everyone outside that identity is scum, regardless of their behavior, you are not going to have a healthy society. They've known this for 3,000 years. People copied it by hand in the heat, sweating away their very short lives in order to preserve it, because it's right. 2 more verses just to round this thing out. So the first one is in Proverbs 28, verse 21. To show partiality is not good, because for a piece of bread a man will transgress. Okay, what does this add to the picture? To show partiality, once again, literally, to recognize faces. And it's not saying pretend that you don't know somebody when you do. To recognize identities is not good. Now, unlike in the first verse where it said this, it said to recognize faces in judgment, in the system of justice is not good. This doesn't say that. It says to recognize identities at all, whether it's got to do with the justice system or not, is not good. Once again, good being beneficial, functional, productive, life-giving, something that's going to cause a flourishing and growing. So, to play favorites based on identity politics, regardless of whose identity is being favored, one way or the other. It doesn't change from, well, yes, obviously favoring white people over black people is not good, but favoring black people over white people is good. No, it doesn't make exceptions. Good is good, bad is bad in the Bible. That's the beautiful thing about it. It doesn't use one standard for weighing this situation and another standard for weighing that situation. It's just the standard, and it cuts across the board. You're supposed to be completely impartial about these things and base it off that actual case. Okay, now what about the part, a man will transgress for a piece of bread? Well, first of all, it's not just the word for man. It's not just the word ish, which is man. This is the word for a champ. It's a prevailing warrior. It's the one that's come out on top. It's a man's man. He's a champ. That kind of man. An admirable man. A strong man. A man who has overcome. Even he will transgress. What does that mean? That's talking about a betrayal, an invasion, crossing a line. Even that kind of person will cross the line over something as minor as a fragment of bread. So what is this trying to say to us? It's trying to make us recognize that even the mighty will rebel against what is right and commit invading betrayals that violate others, that cross the line into their life, their territory, and do so for the smallest and most basic of reasons. That's part of humanity. So in light of that, you are to realize how quickly things can get out of hand and make this sort of practice taboo. You are to set the standard for yourself that factoring in identities is 100% taboo. And that inclination in humanity is not allowed to be indulged. Not even a little bit. Not even once in a while. Not even for a good cause. This word is a very firm no. It's an emphatic no that is used in this verse. It's not the word that was used before that was the word for never, which is, never is a pretty emphatic word, but this is a very, very emphatic, firm no. A command no. Why? Because even the mighty fall prey to this. And the only way to guard against falling prey to this, and then falling so prey to it that you will commit acts of injustice over the smallest things. The only way to avoid people becoming completely desensitized to crossing the line and wronging others and thinking that that is somehow okay, it's their right, maybe that even makes them a good person. You have to have the standard no. No, not ever, not even a little bit, not allowed. Blind justice, colorblind society. No, no, no. They knew this 3,000 years ago. What happens to a society that doesn't live by these warnings, that just decides, I don't care. I will drive off the cliff. I'm doing the identity politics things. That's what I want to do. That's what I'm going to do. Proverbs 21, verse 7 and 8, going to be the last ones we cover. The violence of the wicked will drag them away because they refuse to act with justice. The way of a guilty man is crooked, but as for the pure, his conduct is upright. Okay, what does this tell us? The word here for violence is the word for pillaging. It's when you have broken into a city, you have ravaged it, you have destroyed it, plundered it, and left it in ruins. So the destructive plundering and ravaging ruin of the criminal, the guilty person in the wrong, will wash them away in their own chaos because they stubbornly and deliberately refused to behave justly and to produce just standards and just verdicts. When you insist on identity politics, you are the guilty criminal. You are the one doing wrong, biblically speaking. Now, once again, if you're somebody who is a practicing Jew or a practicing Christian, that carries weight for you. If you're not, obviously it doesn't carry moral weight for you, but surely you see just from a point of reason why that would be true. We've talked about why, because redirecting the benefits towards those people robs the people that are actually being productive and good for society of justice. Justice cuts one way or another. When you let a criminal off, you're being nice to him, but you're being incredibly unnice to his next victim. There are choices in life. You have to choose. Does giving this person who is violent with a record of repeated acts of violence mercy? Is that cost-free? Of course it's not. You know full well he's going to hurt someone else. So you're being merciful to him at the cost of his next victim. Or you protect that next victim, you protect the person he's already victimized by punishing him, which means you're not being especially merciful to him, but you're protecting the innocent because he's got a choice. No one's got a gun to his head to make him behave this way. Perverting justice based off of this kind of identity politics that says you may be guilty, you may be in the wrong, but if you're within this certain identity, we're going to praise you as being right. We're going to make you the victim. We're going to redirect justice away from the actual victim. We're going to warp it and bend it and flip it on its head. That is the destructive plundering of your society, is what this is saying. And the problem is that you, the person doing that, will not be immune from the consequences. That is a ravaging flood of chaos that you have just unleashed. And it's going to sweep you away too. And you've unleashed this because of a stubborn and deliberate refusal to just behave justly, to set your own personal preferences aside, and to just do the right thing. Why are you refusing to do that? Probably because your identity is everything to you too. You can't let go of the identity politics because you've built your whole life around identity. You being someone in support of identity politics is your identity. Now you'll have to figure out who you are all over again. But the alternative is this. Society collapses and the rubble falls on you too. When Samson pulled down the temple, and he did this knowing what was going to happen, so in his case it was brave, but in this example it would just be stupid. When Samson pulled down the temple, yes, he killed hundreds of the enemy. And he died having his brains bashed out under those big old rocks too. You can insist on doing that, but that's going to be the result. They've known this for thousands of years. And those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. The second part of that verse, the way of a guilty man is crooked, but as for the pure, his conduct is upright. The way is a word describing a road, a route, and the destination, and your manner of traveling it. So it's literally a life path involving the conduct, the route, and the destination all in one. The life path of the guilty man, the word for guilty, is describing something that is tortuously twisted. It's been wrestled into this warped shape. It's upside down. It's entirely unstable. A man who has tied himself into these knots in order to try to live life this way that doesn't work, that doesn't function, that's making society collapse. His entire life path is crooked. The word there is strangely foreign. Or excuse me, I got those two reversed. This would be the word for guilty. Strangely foreign and criminally guilty. It's a combination of those two things. Basically, this person who has twisted themselves into knots in order to try to make this incredibly warped system work to achieve some sort of justice that makes up for past things that happened centuries ago, and all of the instead of dealing with, okay, what happened in this case? I don't care in the context of this case what happened to your great granddaddy. What happened now? You've tied yourself into knots in order to achieve some sort of cosmic justice. And what you wind up with is something that is strange, alien, and criminally guilty, and in a way that's a burden, a heavy weight. The word indicates a heaviness. Do you feel heavy? They've known for 3,000 years that you would. That's why they try to warn you. But as for the pure, his conduct is upright. Okay, what does pure mean? It's talking about a liquid that is clear. It's unpolluted. You can see all the way to it, like those pictures of certain spots in shallow parts of the ocean near an island where you can look straight down to the bottom. It's so clear. It's a person who's transparent, who's clean. His conduct, this is actually a word meaning his labor and the wages that he gets for his labor. His fruit and its outcomes are upright, meaning they're moral. That's the right part. Upright, so they're upward aiming. And the meaning of the word itself is straightforward and level. The goal is not to tie yourself into knots, trying to achieve some sort of cosmic justice, and all you wind up doing is creating something strange, bizarre, that doesn't function, that doesn't work, but you've put your whole world into this, and therefore you just can't let it go. It's so much simpler to let it go. Just be a transparent person who's clean, who comes to these things without all of the rest attached. Because when you're approaching it from that place, then both what you're doing, the labor, and the wages that you get out of it will be moral, upward aiming, straightforward, and level, which is what you're ultimately aiming for in the first place, is a level playing field. You will be able to look yourself in the mirror and say, you know what, I'm behaving in a straightforward way, in a way that's level, in a way that's aiming up, that's moral, treating other people the way I want to be treated. And not only will you be able to look yourself in the mirror and say that about yourself, but the results that you get will be those things too. They will be just outcomes. They will be the moral outcomes, the level outcomes, straightforward and direct, not something that's tortuously twisted, not something that's upside down, something that is upward aiming, something that is good. And who could ask for a better identity than that? Because when you stop putting identity at the center, when you stop making it God, and allow it to be one thing that is primarily defined by what you do, not by how you identify, not by how you see yourself, not by how other people label you depending on the group that you fit in based on where all of these things intersect, from your sex to your skin color to your religion to which ethnic group you came from and what happened to them 4,000 years ago. And, you know, okay, well, they enslaved somebody, but then they were the slaves, and When you let all of that go, and who you are is defined by what you do, and the way that you define others is not defined based off of resentment because of what somebody who may or may not have been related to them, but who had similar skin color to them, did 100, 200, 500 years ago, which they had nothing to do with. All the resentment starts to go away. You can look at them the way that you look at yourself. I judge you based on what you do. The world suddenly becomes a better place. Justice is a natural result of it. You are incentivizing the things that you actually want instead of the things that you don't want. You're not so focused on yourself, on your identity, on other people's identities, which means that the depression starts to go down and the anxiety starts to go down, the mental health problems start to go down. Now, sure, none of us can change the world. I can tell you this. You can tell it to someone else. Doesn't mean the world's going to change, but you can change. I promise you, you don't actually need the world to change to get to a good spot for you. And when you're in a good spot for you, you're in a much more capable place of fighting for a better world, of being a living example of why this is better. No one's going to listen to you about how to fix the world if you can't fix you. No one's going to listen to you about how to make the world a loving place if you are rabidly screaming hate 24/7. No one's going to listen to you about how to achieve justice and fairness for all if every conversation is just how much you hate everybody else and they're the problem and boy, I just wish they'd all die. I mean, that's not coming across as somebody that's balanced and got it together and sane and centered, whose advice you would want to listen to. We all got to start fixing ourselves. And the best place to start is to look at some wisdom from the past, because there have been a lot of wise people who have come before us who have sat and thought about these things. There is nothing new under the sun. These problems have been around for as long as humanity's been conscious. To figure out what answers they got, how we can build on that, because there's no point in starting from the ground if you don't have to. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. It's been invented. Now you can improve on it. We're obviously not using the wheel for wagons anymore. I mean, we've got cars, we've got planes, got trains. I'm not suggesting we go back to the past. But how about we look at the past so we don't have to repeat it, and we take from it what's worth taking, what hundreds of generations preserved for us, and we take that and we say, okay, let's build the next level on this skyscraper. Let's build the next floor. Let's simplify instead of complicate. We actually don't need to figure out a way to right the injustices of the past, because we can't. None of us have time machines. Imagine how you would feel for just a second if you actually let that go. That's it. We're never going to talk about it again. We will teach the injustices of the past as part of school. We need to learn about this. But we're not going to teach it in a way that's, how do we fix it? Well, of course you can't fix it. It's done. Terrible things happened. We can't fix the past. All we can do is fix the present. What are the problems of the present? Are they even the same problems as the past? Or are we cosplaying that they are? We're responsible to fix the present because that's what the future is built on. The future is something that can be shaped. The past is marble. It is stone. It is done. We learn from it. That's what the past is, therefore. That's what we did today. You can learn from both the good and the bad. But I can't go back in history and tell Solomon something that he needed to know. And we've been trying to do this for multiple decades, thinking that if we gave enough goodies out in the present, it would somehow equal out the past, and it hasn't worked. Affirmative action was supposed to do that. It didn't. It led to DEI. The people who actually grew up as children under Jim Crow are less resentful about it than their great-grandchildren who have never once experienced first-hand discrimination in their life. You know, there was a study that they actually did to see how much you pick up on stuff when you're looking for it. So they took beautiful women and they got makeup artists, like the people who do makeup in movies. Those makeup artists put scars on their face. On their face. So it would be very prominent. And they showed them themselves in the mirror. And then they told them, okay, we're going to send you in to a job interview because what we're actually testing is we want to see how much people get discriminated against for having a disfigurement on their face. Because we're betting people get discriminated against for having that, especially on their face. And you'll be able to tell us because you're beautiful. Normally you get treated one way. You'll know if you're being treated differently. And so you can come back and tell us, did they treat you differently now that you've got a scar on your face? Except that wasn't what they were actually testing. Right as the women were about to leave the room, they stopped them and they're like, oh, wait a minute, we need to touch up the makeup. And they removed the scar and sent them into the interview. The women went into the interview believing they had scars on their face when they did not. Almost all of them reported being treated with discrimination, even though that's not possible because the scar wasn't there for the employer to discriminate against. But if that's what you're looking for, you're going to interpret everything that way, which is how you wind up with people who have never actually been discriminated against, believing that the majority of people in this country hate them or something, when we're actually rooting for them. And their grandparents and great-grandparents who actually did face legalized discrimination are less resentful, are less hate-filled, less victim mindset, excuse-filled. We cannot actually fix the past. And the good thing is we don't need to. We don't need to fix the past. The past is done. We need to look around at each other here in the present and say, what are we doing that's working? What are we doing that's not working? What are we doing that has made life worse? What are we doing that's made life better? There are some people out there that don't want to use metrics. They have their preferred way of seeing the world, and no matter how bad it actually makes the world, they're going to keep doing it and they'll double down. Okay. I'm not going to control those people. You're not going to control those people. We don't need to be able to control those people. You try to build a society where those people are not front and center, and they're not incentivized to be that way. How? By controlling the one person that you can control, you, which makes the best case possible to people who are still on the fence, who can be won, who have not dug in their heels, when they are trying to figure out, okay, I'm not happy with my life, how do I make it better? If you are that person and you're not happy with your life, you're looking around, okay, I'm so miserable, I'm willing to try anything. Let me see what's available. Okay, here's this person who's enjoying their life, has good relationships, doesn't hate anybody, doesn't resent anybody, is happy with what they have, gets more enjoyment out of what they have, however limited it may be. Here's somebody over here who has even more than them, And all they do is bitch and yell and rave and hate and so on and so forth. For the person who's miserable and looking for a way out of misery, which one of those two people do you think they're going to say, can I ask you what you're doing because that's what I want to be? Do you think the miserable person wants to be that raving person? I understand it's a cliche, but it got to be a cliche because it's true. Be the change you want to see. If you want a just world, it doesn't have to be complicated. Just world has to just mean a level playing field where we take each case on a case-by-case basis. You're not going to be discriminated against for which group you belong to. And you're not going to be favored for it either. We're going to judge your case based on what you did. We have way overcomplicated our lives. We have way overcomplicated who we are. It's the overcomplication of who we are into this thing called identity that has made people so miserable. You are not an identity. Identities can be chosen. They can be put on you by others. They have no substance to them. That's one of the great things about the Hebrew word for lie. It basically means something that doesn't hold up. There's a saying in Hebrew that a lie has no legs. It collapses because there's nothing under it. It won't stand up out in reality, which is why they don't ultimately win. That's what an identity is, at least based on the way we've decided to define it. It's just a bunch of mists and vapors that you've chosen because, ooh, I like that color of smoke. I claim it. It's mine. And a bunch of mist and vapors that other people have put on you. You're white. You're straight. You're black. You're what? Like, who cares? Seriously, who cares? I am not a white, straight woman. I'm Rebecca. Nice to meet you. Who I am is based on what I do. It's not based on how I label myself with smoke, and it is not based on how you label me with smoke. That's the kind of identity that holds up out in the world. It's based on what I do. And when you do things that you can feel good about, instead of tying yourself into knots in order to try to fit this system that somebody concocted that sure as hell ain't working for anybody, that's when you're free. Hope that you enjoyed today's episode. If it's something you think that someone out there that you know would enjoy listening to, feel free to pass it on. And I hope you come back again next week. Until then, have a good week, my friends.